I've been in Macon for 4 years. I've been an agent for 4 years. I've been with the Bureau for almost 6 years. I primarily work human trafficking and violent crimes against children, so that's why I'm here with you guys today. Does anybody know what CSEC is? I know there's probably half the group that, well, yeah, of course we know CSEC, and half that doesn't. So someone throw out the definition of CSEC. Anybody? Okay, it's the commercial sexual exploitation of children. It's a form of human trafficking, and in the state of Georgia and for federal law, as long as the juvenile has not attained the age of 18 and they are involved in any sort of sex activity, it's considered child exploitation. Some examples of sex trafficking are prostitution, pornography. We've seen a lot of gang-based prostitution. The gangbangers and drug dealers are finding that there's a lot more money in prostitution. It's a lot more lucrative. And a lot of these gang kids are fairly young, and so they can attract younger females, and that's where we see some of the juveniles getting involved. Familial pimping is also pretty common. A mom decides she's not making enough money, so she starts pimping her daughter out. That's a pretty common issue. And then stripping, and we'll talk about stripping a little bit more later, but it's another form of that. And then internet-based exploitation, and we'll get into that also later. It's probably the biggest form of prostitution in this area. Some statistics from the U.S. Department of Justice study, and they looked at cases between January 2008 and June of 2010. Federally funded task forces, which are all over the country, opened over 2,000 sex trafficking cases in 2 years. Over 1,000 of those cases, so over half of those cases, had at least one child victim. And that's just what they found. So we're looking at huge, huge numbers here. Yes, trafficking is happening in Georgia. I know the Lifetime movies always show it's coming from overseas and it's not affecting us here. It's going to be in New York or Dallas or all these, or even Atlanta, not Macon, Georgia, not Bibb County, but it is happening here. The most common age of entry is 12 to 14 years old, which is a very shocking statistic to me because I feel like when I was 12 years old, that was not ever something that would have crossed my mind. But the types of children that get involved in this are desperate, and so they go, this is how they get into it, is looking for love or looking for whatever a means to an end, and so it's getting younger and younger. Atlanta is one of 14 cities with the highest incidence of children exploited through prostitution. Atlanta is called the human trafficking hub. I know that's been really big the past year or so. It's in the top 5 cities for human trafficking, and it is the top city for trafficking of Hispanic females. That doesn't mean juveniles, but we do see a lot of juveniles involved in the Latin American trafficking. So we're going to see a lot of that. And then NCMEC had 1,000 endangered runaways were reported from Georgia between 2008 and 2010. Now, you have to answer this question, because I'm not just going to listen to silence. Why do you guys think Atlanta's so big for this? Throw out some reasons. The airport, I heard that, yeah. What else? Sports, yep, that's a good one. What else? Entertainment, perfect. You guys think of anything else? Oh, interstate, yes. Y'all nailed half my list. Big tourism. We've got the Coca-Cola Museum. We've got the aquarium, the Atlanta Zoo. There's a lot of stuff that bring people from out of the country and from around the country. Obviously, the huge airport makes it very easy. There's a lot of people traveling, a lot of businessmen that'll just stay one night. They need entertainment that night. All the interstate connections is very convenient for people to come to Atlanta. They can come from the west, from the north, from the south, and so they all kind of converge, and this is where it takes place. The dense population, I did not realize this. It is the largest concentration of colleges and universities in the southern United States, and so that brings the right demographic to the area, not juveniles, but young girls. And then the music industry. A lot of the cases that we've seen involve men who claim to be contracting girls for modeling, for acting, for rapping, to be in their music videos, things like that, and then it turns into forced prostitution. This study just came out March 2014 by the Urban Institute, and I thought it was very fascinating. As you can see, Atlanta was the top of the 8 cities that they studied for both the pimp's average weekly income being $32,833 a week. for an Atlanta pimp. That blew my mind. And then for just the value of the underground sex industry in general, $290 million. And I know they talked to a lot of pimps in this study, was how they did some of their research, and that's just, it's astronomical. As someone talked about the economy earlier, why can't we be putting that money towards a better use? So awareness is key for that. This came out of the study as well. Pimps travel in circuits, especially with juveniles, to try to keep juveniles from being identified by law enforcement. And this was a circuit that was identified. They go from Atlanta to Macon to Augusta to Savannah to Columbus and back up to Atlanta. They stay away from Gainesville, and I think this is all just ease of getting there. It's the easiest, you can just pop on the interstate to most of these, and that's how they do it. Makes it very difficult to track the victims, because if they're not staying in the same place, we've got to figure out where they went. So that's why they do this.
And I think I have a unique perspective on that, because I cover a lot of these areas. I cover Savannah, Augusta, and Macon, and sometimes I cover for Atlanta. So when we do proactive investigations where we're going out and seeking juveniles, this world is such a small world. We run into pimps that we've arrested in Augusta, in Savannah. So they're all very closely related. They all talk to each other about their business models and what areas are hot as far as law enforcement, or what areas are very lucrative for them at the time. So it's a very close-knit community.
Pimping. We're going to talk about different, yes. You guys have never seen that? Probably a little distasteful, sorry. Pimping is probably the number one way that we are seeing juveniles being exploited, is through having some sort of pimp. More often it is a male pimp. Basically a pimp just controls the female. He facilitates her prostitution, whether it's putting her on the internet sites or getting the dates for her. He controls her money. And here it says, I think the technical definition is they receive a portion, but most pimps are going to keep almost 100%, and in cases of exploitation, it is 100%. And then Urban Dictionary, and this is a big pet peeve of mine, the word pimp doesn't always have a negative connotation. A lot of people use the word pimp to mean this guy's got the girls, he's got the best bling, things like that. Or people use it like, man, that's so pimp. When you work this stuff, pimping no longer has that positive connotation. So when you hear it, and I refrain from using it just because it's not this glamorous thing. In reality, pimping is very harsh and very brutal. This website, I encourage you guys to all go look at it. It's very eye-opening. It's very crass, so if you are sensitive, don't look at it. But it is Pimping 2.0. It teaches pimps how to be a pimp. It's unbelievable. And these headings, how to be a pimp, how to keep your bitches in check, that there's paragraphs on each of those. You'll notice the one that says pimp with your mind, not with your fist. I thought, oh wow, these pimps have a heart. No, what he means is get inside your bitch's head so that she will make more money for you. Because if your bitch doesn't love you, she won't produce. So it's all about psychological manipulation, and that's what they teach. And there's a wonderful disclaimer at the bottom of the page that said, this is for entertainment purposes only. Don't use it, pimping is illegal. No, they just put that on there so the website can stay up. But this is websites that pimps have gone to learn tradecraft and to understand how things work, and because of freedom of speech, it can stay out there. There are also websites that pimps can post pictures of their girls. If a girl is out of pocket, it means she's left her pimp, and he wants to get her back because she is his source of income. So he will post her picture, and other pimps, as Nancy said, are talking. He might pay him to get the girl back, or he'll say, cut her, beat her, do whatever you want because she left me. When she's desperate, she'll have to come back. So there's websites out there where pimps do this, and it's basically a most wanted list, except instead of recovering her for good reasons, they're allowed to do whatever they want to her. The pimp encourages it. Internet prostitution is the number one way of buying and selling sex with children and young women, and especially in Macon. We're seeing that that's the rise, is definitely internet prostitution as opposed to the streets, and the pimps are involved in this internet prostitution. In-calls occur A prostitute sets up at a house, and in-call means the John, who's the date, has to come to her. She controls the situation. The pimp is likely next door, down the hall, across the hall, controlling the situation. They'll pace the parking lot. They'll know who shows up. They'll know if it's more than one guy that's going to try to hurt the girl. So they're totally in control. A lot of pimps will do out calls also, where the girl will go to the date. They lose control in this situation. So you'll see a lot of postings that say in call only. Or, when an undercover officer calls a prostitute, she'll say, no, I'm not out call, I'm in call. That's what that means. When we do undercover operations, in call is obviously the most dangerous because then we lose control. If we are doing out calls where the girls will come to us, we've got control over the situation and can ensure the officer's safety and the girl's safety. Craigslist, it's backed off a lot because Craigslist came under a lot of heat for allowing prostitution to occur on their site. And I don't know actually when the statistic was, but at one point there were 16,000 adult services being posted a day, just on Craigslist, not in Macon. In 2008, 2,800 ads of prostituted children were on Craigslist, and that's what got a lot of heat because we were showing that there were juveniles being posted, and so they've kind of done better about shutting it down. And Craigslist and Backpage can report suspicious ads to NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and then they send those ads to the agency who works in that area, and we have to determine whether or not it really is a juvenile. And Backpage is probably the most popular in Macon and across the country for juvenile prostitutes and for adult prostitutes as well. Here's a snapshot from Backpage. I actually did this on Monday. There were 50 ads posted on this Monday in Macon. And I looked through them, and I didn't really see any that looked like they could be juveniles. I didn't go through all 50 of them, but this is happening here. They are using this here. They are posting here. When you go to Backpage, it's very similar to Craigslist. I assume most of you guys have probably used Craigslist at some point. But Backpage lists the same stuff out. You go to the adult section, and then you can choose what you want. And then so you can see some of the girls will describe themselves. One of these girls, I think there's a pointer on here somewhere. There's two of them working together, and so they're trying to get more money by saying you get a 2 for 1, and one girl's black and one girl's white, so they're saying we got the best of both here. Another girl, red cherry ain't none like the rest. It's only one that's the best, and that's me. And these girls, they post their age, and I think there's one on here. 69. A lot of times those are juveniles when they post 69 because they're not going to put that they're 15. A lot of the girls that are in their young 20s, 21, 23, those are typically can be underage as well because they're not going to post their real age, and rarely you see someone actually posting that they're 18 or 19. You're typically going to see in the 20s or 69 for the juveniles. On the ads, they are really into putting disclaimers on there. They think that if they post on the ad, if you're law enforcement, you're required to tell me you're law enforcement or it's entrapment. That's not true, but they're trying everything they can. They'll use a lot of code. Some of the code is roses instead of money because they think if I don't discuss payment and money on the internet, they can't charge me. It's not true, as long as it's discussed at some point. A lot of pimps will screen, and if the male says he's under the age of 35, they think it's a cop. So they won't meet with him. They'll say, no, we're busy. So there's a lot of speed bumps that get in the way when we're trying to do these types of investigations to actually locate juveniles because they've gotten pretty smart. We've done a lot of arrests in the country and in this area, and so they're wising up and they're trying to keep us from understanding, which one's a juvenile, which one's not. The pictures that are posted, and I didn't want to put one up there because they're pretty graphic, but the juveniles typically cover their face. So if you see a picture that doesn't have a face, or she's covered her face with her hair, or the pictures from here down or from the back, a lot of times those are juveniles. A lot of adults won't show their face either, just because they don't mind being out there, but they don't want the whole world to know that they're out there. And then one prostitute taught me that you can tell the difference between a girl who has a pimp and a girl who doesn't, and it's based off of the types of pictures they take. And so the ones that look more like glamour shots have been taken by a pimp, whereas the girls that are taking selfies or just not as posed of a shot is probably working independent. So that was pretty interesting to me. Strip clubs, we've got one in Macon, Sensation South. We have not found any juveniles there, but strip clubs can turn into trafficking and exploitation if it becomes forced, or if it's a juvenile. And actually, a juvenile is not allowed to strip, and so that's automatically exploitation, even if they want to. And that's another issue you run into with these young girls. A lot of them think they want to be doing this. They think it's glamorous. They think it's cool. And so they'll, well, I'm a stripper. That's so cool. It's illegal. And for them, they're considered a victim, and they don't like that a lot of times. So you get some pushback because, well, I want to be stripping, and they don't understand that they don't have that right until they turn 18. The Strip, which is really popular in Atlanta, they'll have nightly quotas. Most of these victims are going to be U.S. citizens, and the average age is 12 years old on the Strip. Macon Pimp recently identified 2 local tracks, 2nd Street, and that's where most of the transvestite prostitutes are going to be. If you've ever driven, kind of where it gets sketchy, you'll see them out there. And then there's the Unionville area near Fishstock, and that's where the non-transvestites are. Who are the offenders? In sex trafficking cases, the majority of offenders are going to be male. It's actually 81%. This was a US DOJ study, Trafficking in Persons report from 2009, and it's the same statistics from the beginning. So they looked at that same 08 to 10. The average offender, is 18 to 34 years old. So this is a very young crowd, and the younger the pimp, the younger girls they can typically get. So we're going to see a trend downward in age as we see the girls continue to get younger also. The most common race is African American. Nationality, they're mostly U.S. citizens. And the majority of offenders have some sort of criminal history. And as I mentioned earlier, if they used to be drug dealers or gangbangers and they were realizing that their profits were dropping in that when the economy dropped, people couldn't afford drugs. Sex is something people always want. They're always going to pay for sex. And a lot of times that's a little bit cheaper than drugs. And so these guys who have been drug dealers for years and years said there's a lot more money in prostitution. So we're seeing a crossover from what they've done and what they're doing now. In sex trafficking cases, most of our victims are going to be female. Once again, the average age is 12, and U.S. citizens. And then the background, and this is pretty key, and I doubted it until I really started working these cases, but most of these girls are runaways or throwaways. There were problems at home, whether it was mom remarried a new man and now he wants her, or mom doesn't want the daughter anymore, she's got the new man, or problems with the dad. There are almost always problems at home. 1.6 million children run away each year, and these are the children that are most vulnerable to being picked up in this trade. And it takes, the average is about 48 hours for a child to be approached by an exploiter. So that's, 2 days is all it takes for them to find them. And then 90% have a history of sexual abuse. And most of that's going to be familial sexual abuse is what we've seen.
When we're talking about commercial sexual exploitation of children, remember it's not necessarily the exchange of money. When we're talking about a 12 or a 13 or a 14-year-old girl, she may be having survival sex. She may be having sex for a roof over her head or for a meal from McDonald's. Anything that's exchanged for that sex act is commercial sexual exploitation. So, when we talk about older women, it's always money, but with young girls, it can be anything. And oftentimes, when it addresses runaways or throwaways, these girls are typically being recruited before they even make the decision to leave the home. So sometimes it's through Facebook. Friends that they have on Facebook are friends with a pimp, and they have no idea who this guy is, and they take a boyfriend approach. Or the girls are simply walking, from school or walking home or walking around in the evening. And, you can drive down the street and see a young person who probably is, not in the best situation. So certainly the pimps can identify that when they're out and about, and they prey on that. And the girls, because of their home lives or because of their previous history of victimization, are just, they are prey, and they're easy prey, unfortunately.
We talked about this a little bit, peer recruitment. A lot of times if one girl has been solicited by a pimp or been brought into a pimp's control, she's going to go out and talk to her friends to do it too. And so that we see that a lot where other young girls will go places trying to get more young girls to join them. Kidnapped is on here. That's not, I think that's the impression that everybody has, the movie Taken and Taken 2, that this is what's happening. Girls are going overseas, they're going on spring break, and it's happening there. That does happen, but the majority of what we're seeing is this local stuff, and it doesn't involve kidnapping. It involves girls running away or being, either whether they're running away on their own or, as Nancy said, they're being enticed to run away. The selling by a family member, that occurs, but more often what we'll see with family is that the parent or older sibling or aunt or whatever is the actual pimp, not that they said, here, I'm going to sell you to another pimp. You'll see that a little bit more with the like Latin American and Asian, but not so much the U.S. citizens. Nancy hit on this, the recruitment. And something I think that stuck out to me on this slide is that they're looking for a child with no purpose, a child with a void. And so it's crazy. And I think, at the bottom, the same pimp that told me about the tracks told me he recruited girls who were interested in sex. He called them freaky. So girls that like to have sex, then he says, if you're going to have sex anyway, you might as well get paid. That was his recruitment shtick. And it worked. He had a lot of girls that prostituted for him because he was able to convince them it was worth it. But then he went on to say he looked for girls who needed help, and he said this, girls who lived in Section 8 housing and didn't have a job, because he knew they were vulnerable, and if they could hear they could make money by having sex, something they enjoyed anyway, little did they realize the strain on their body, but he didn't tell them that part. He just told them, look, you like to have sex, you might as well get paid. I even had one of the girls tell me she was thinking about going back into prostitution because she likes to have sex and she'll get paid anyway, and that's what he had told her. So it's really sad how they get into the girls' heads and how this is happening. And I know there's going to be more talk about victimology, and I'm definitely not an expert. I do have a degree in psychology, but I've not worked this type of stuff. But something that everybody asks is, why didn't she leave? The door wasn't locked. When the guy came in and the pimp left, why didn't she leave? Why didn't she tell the pimp or the date? She was being forced. And it's basically because the traffickers have conditioned them in some ways. These are the descriptions up here are pretty extreme. Most of the conditioning is love. Most of these girls, or a lot of these girls, have daddy issues. The dad wasn't there. He's in jail. He's hurt her. They are looking for that. And the pimp realizes that, and he comes in and says, baby, I love you. And I can provide for you. And for the first bit, and even when she's prostituting, he is. He's buying her clothes. He's letting her get her hair done, her nails done, makeup, all of this stuff she never got from her family. One situation, the pimp took them to Disney World. And these are kids. Even when they're 17, a lot of these kids never had a childhood. So think about taking a 12, 13, 14-year-old to Disney World. I went when I was 16, and that was exciting. Your parents never took you to Disney World, but this pimp did. Who are you going to align yourself with? The pimp who took care of you in your eyes. And yes, I've got to go have sex and prostitute myself, but he's still taking care of me and he loves me. And I think that's, when you understand that, it really helps you to see why these girls stay in this horrible situation. Because when we look at it, all we see is how bad it is for them, but we didn't know how bad it was before. And a lot of times, as bad as this is with the pimp, it was even worse before. So they don't realize that there's even better out there.
Juvenile victim that we recovered in a case, and she was so angry at us when we recovered her. And her comment was, you just broke up a family. Why didn't you get me last week? Well, last week she was with a different pimp who was mean to her and who beat her. What she didn't realize was this family that she was now with, she had been sold to by that pimp. And they treated her much better because she was sort of new to them, and they really wanted to season her and groom her, and they knew that she had a great deal of value. So for her, we had broken up her family, even though she has local family, but she aligned herself with these people who were treating her well. And it took us quite a while to help her understand what that family had in mind for her down the road.
And a lot of them won't testify against their pimps because they still love them. I mean, I have a victim right now who she's told me over and over, she wants to testify, but she says, I love him. It's really hard for me. If he was out of jail, I would probably go back to him. Even though she came to us, she still has those feelings, but that's because she never had someone that treated her that way. Her grandmother had raised her, and her grandmother passed away, and that was the only person that had truly, she felt, loved her. And so that's what you get with these, and that's what makes it so difficult to help them realize that there is better out there. And that's our big goal, is to show them a better life and to show them love in ways the pimp never would. Demographics, that's just charts to go with it. I like the one over here, the bar chart, the missing children involved in sex trafficking, just to show the different ages when they went missing. And, you see it get really high right there in those early teen years, 15, 16, 17. And 17 is still a juvenile for sexual exploitation, although in Georgia, the age of consent is 16, not in this situation, and not for federal law. This is just a chart that shows active and resolved missing children from NCMEC, and these children had suspected or confirmed involvement with sex trafficking. So you can see the heavy concentration along the East Coast, and especially in Georgia and in Atlanta. So it is happening here. Who could come into contact with these victims? Everybody. Everybody in this room, in some form or fashion, could come into contact with a victim of sex trafficking. And that's something to really think about, especially those of you that are working directly with juveniles and what you do every day, is knowing how to respond and the right questions to ask, which we will get into. Something that we're really finding the best way to work this is proactively and as a group. Law enforcement can't work it by themselves. Child advocacy centers can't work it by themselves. Doctors can't work it by themselves. We have to work together, because together is how we'll encounter these victims. I don't patrol the streets, so I'm not going to just walk up on one. A patrol officer would. He's got to talk to, or she, to the investigators to know what to look for. And that's part of the FBI. We've been doing a lot of training to departments so that they know what to look for. What ideas, images, or words come to mind when you hear the term child or teen prostitute? And you can say really what, when you hear the word prostitute, what do you think about? Be honest. On the street. What else? Okay. What are some negative terms you think about? Slut? Would you think about that? Or hoe? Is that stuff that's what we think about, right? A prostitute is selling herself, she's dirty, things like that. Okay, but if I call it a C-sec victim, what do you think about? Desperation would probably also qualify. What else? Helpless? Hopeless? Does your mental images shift when I call it a prostitute versus when I call it a victim? That's what we're trying to teach. And that's the hardest part, because for the longest time, people thought of prostitution as something the girl wants to do. It's a decision she is making that's less than our moral standards.
Choice.
Yeah, so we have to switch how we think about it when we approach these cases. Here's some terms. Oh, whose problem is it? Prostitution is law enforcement. It's not a community problem, it's a law enforcement problem. But a victim, well, it's everybody's problem. So what we want to do is shift your focus from thinking about these girls as prostitutes, but as victims. Because even if they want to be doing it and they are underage, they are still a victim. Because somewhere along the line, someone taught them that that was okay. And so their mindset is wrong, and that makes them a victim.
And this isn't just a community-wide change. Like, we're not just asking you to change the way you talk about CSEC victims in your agencies or in your community. This is law enforcement too. We have to do a lot of education with not only the patrol officers that we work with, but our own agents in our own agencies. I get emails about juvenile prostitutes, and I always cringe and I correct them. They're not juvenile prostitutes. They don't have a choice, and that has a lot of negative connotations. And I think when we start looking at it differently, then we can treat them differently and provide them what they need versus treating them like someone who is not worthy of our time.
And as Nancy said, this is something I've had to adjust to as well, because I grew up thinking prostitution was a choice people made, and it was something I would never have done. It's just where I grew up. And so learning and shifting my focus has really made a difference in when the girls hate you and cuss at you and yell at you, remembering that they're a victim, that, as much as they try to say they chose to do it, they didn't. They didn't have, as we said earlier, they weren't old enough to make that decision. We talked about what CSEC stands for, commercial sexual exploitation of children. And as Nancy said earlier, it's exchanging something of value, whether it's money, whether it's goods, whether it's services. So clothes, food, anything like that all counts, as long as someone benefits from the exchange. Calling it CSEC identifies that it's a crime against a child instead of the person making a choice, the child making a choice. They're victims, they're not criminals. Takes the blame off of the child, since she couldn't make that choice, and puts it on the person that made that choice for her, her exploiter, her pimp. It also makes us ask the question, who is exploiting children? We need to be doing something about that. So when you find a juvenile who has been exploited, the next step is to figure out who did it. And it helps authorities, and this is specifically for law enforcement, we have to respond with support and with resources instead of responding with our handcuffs and with our fists. Not that we would ever hit somebody, but you know what I mean. Instead of taking the iron approach, we have to take a more gentle approach. Some signs to look for. Look to see if a child is underage. Children in the sex industry are given fake IDs or they have no ID. They're going to make up a birthday. They're going to make up what grade they were in, things like that. A lot of times, they don't think about putting it all together. So one of them will just memorize a date of birth, and she won't think, okay, if I'm supposed to be 16, I should have been in this grade. And so when cops or advocates encounter them, the more questions you ask to verify their story, the easier you'll find out if she's telling you the truth. So how old are you? Okay, I'm 16. What's your date of birth? Does the date of birth match how old she said she was? Okay, what grade are you in? And if she says, well, I'm a freshman, okay, she's probably not 16, even though she said she was. So that's something to think about, coming up with ways to verify their story, because they're going to have one. And then also clues in their behavior or appearance, especially those of us that work with juveniles and children a lot. You're going to know how a child behaves versus how a 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old behaves, typically. So watching how they interact, how they answer questions, how they're handling the situation will help you determine if they're underage, or at least it'll give you some questions. I talked about the inconsistencies in their personal information, and then a lot of times if they don't have any identification on them, it could be a sign that they're with a pimp who's kept their stuff, who's held on to it so that they don't have it. Signs of physical or sexual violence, visible signs of violence, burns, bruises, cuts, marks, black eyes, things like that are going to be indicative of some sort of abusive relationship they're in, and if they're prostituting, it is likely from a pimp. If they're emotionally distressed, kind of know about trauma-related behaviors, fear, nervousness, tension, anxiety, and paranoid behavior. A lot of people, I think that one applies a little bit more for the advocates as opposed to law enforcement, because when I get pulled over, even though I am law enforcement, I still get nervous and freak out, and they might think that something happened to me traumatic. And it did, because I got pulled over. So I think that one, if a child's in a safe environment, not facing a cop they might be scared of, they shouldn't exhibit those behaviors, so look for those. And then truancy from school. A lot of kids that are absent for fair amounts of time, not just one day here, one day there, but weeks at a time, could be because they've run away. Find out from the parents or the caretaker what's going on with that kid, and then approach them. If they're in a dominating or controlling relationship, they say, well, my boyfriend this, my boyfriend, he's always making me da-da-da. They use the word boyfriend. They do not call him their pimp. Not until they're out of the life and in some sort of rehabilitation do they begin to think of him as a pimp. At the time, even if he's got 6 other girls, he is still their boyfriend. And they won't tell you that those other 3 girls that were recovered with him were also his girlfriends, but that's what they'll refer to him as. So when she's talking about her boyfriend, controlling what she eats, controlling what she wears, things like that, it could be a sign that it's a pimp. If they don't have their money, if they say, well, I bought dinner last night, but I had to get my money from my boyfriend, another sign it could be a pimp. And then if they don't make eye contact, and where this comes from, the pimp is he owns her. She's just a piece of property to him. And so a lot of times on the Strip, I think this is more common, or if they're at a hotel where a lot of prostitution is occurring, the pimps will train the girls not to look any other pimp in the eye because that says that she wants him and they belong to this other pimp. So they won't make eye contact. So they've been trained not to make this eye contact, which then can translate into a conversation with one of us. Clothing, anything that's sexually provocative. And I know that's tricky because styles change and hemlines get shorter and lower. And so a lot of times a child might be dressed that way and they are not a prostitute. But if that and other signs are there, that's what you're looking for. Also, weather inappropriate. A lot of these girls will show up to dates in the dead of winter with a coat and lingerie underneath. That does not fit in. Even if you're going out to a club legitimately, you're still going to be a little bit warm. You're more concerned about being warm than about pleasing some man that you're going to have sex with. So look for things like that just don't seem to fit. And then tattoos. Tattoos are really, really big. The guy wants to put his brand on her. And we see this all the time, whether he's got a nickname and his nickname is tattooed on her, whether it's as blatant as she's my girl, which here's a bunch of them, daddy's little bitch. Her real dad is not going to put that on her. Cash, a lot of the stuff we'll talk about, cash or money. The girl down here, it says cash only on her lower back. King Tay, that's the pimp's name. And then Mafia's property. That's also the pimp's name. So you will see these. And on juveniles, the tattoos are typically, they're going to be a little bit more hidden, whether it's like the neck where their hair covers it. Lower back is really popular, their arms and their chest. So it'll be higher up on the arm, likely with a juvenile, so that it's not going to be seen because you have to be 18 without parents' consent. So there are places in Macon that give tattoos to juveniles. I've been told that as long as they already have one tattoo, these places won't ask. They have one, they got to be 18. So the pimps take them in and get another one. A summary of the signs. Oh, here are some slang terms. The life, I've said that a couple times, just refers to the commercial sex industry. They call a pimp their daddy, their PI. Something you might hear, a bottom bitch. If a guy has 6 girls, the girl who's typically been with him the longest will have a hierarchy over the other girls. And contrary to the term bottom bitch, she's actually the head of it, and she will help the guy run the organization. So say he wants to take 3 girls up to Atlanta and leave 3 in Macon, she'll be in charge of the other 2 in Macon. Dates, Johns, those are the buyers of the sex. A renegade is a prostitute who works independently and doesn't have a pimp. Squaring up means you're getting out of the sex industry. They would call me a square because I've never worked in the sex industry. Some of these I haven't heard, but they're out there. A duck is a black female prostitute. A swan is a white female prostitute. And to knock is to lure a prostitute. An exit fee is if the offender, the pimp, requires the victim to pay this. A lot of times it'll either be such a high amount they could never pay it because he only gives them $5 of what they've made, or sometimes they just won't have it and they'll say you can't leave. Here are some questions, and I put together an outline that has all these questions and signs, and I gave it to Sandra yesterday, so it should be up by the end of the week. So if you guys are interested in this stuff that I'm just kind of going through, I did provide it for you. Asking them where they live, who they live with is crucial, because if they're saying, well, like a bunch of friends, what 16-year-old, 14-year-old should just be living with friends and not a parent. If you get them to tell you about their family, and they, as Nancy said, her victim would have described her family as this, the group that she was with, the stable, the pimp stable, not her mom. I have a mom and dad, it would have just been, well, I've got friends that are like family. There are specific questions for runaways. One, it's good to find out if the pimp knows she was a juvenile, because that makes charging it, they have to have knowledge or reasonable belief. And so ask them, well, what did your boyfriend think when he found out you were only 14? And how did he respond? And then you can get that knowledge right there if she says he had knowledge. There's questions for when an adult reports a missing child, who they've been spending time with, who the new boyfriend is. Some of the positive outcomes from CSEC cases: when a child is recovered and rescued, obviously that's number one. Number two is arresting and convicting a pimp. If we can seize his assets, his property, and really hurt him. Money is the big thing to them, so if we can hit him where it hurts most, we love to do that. My biggest thing, and where I'm passionate, is trying to be a positive influence on the child. I really hope that the girls that I work with can learn, and hopefully I can help them realize that there is a better life out there. And so that part is really important to me. Obviously, we can gather more intelligence for other cases and other girls that might be out there. And then the impact on the community. Getting rid of prostitution cleans up a community. If you suspect trafficking, look for the warning signs. And if you're in some sort of capacity where you do formal reports, put it all in your report. That'll be crucial later on in prosecution. Treat the child as a victim, not as a criminal, and then call a specialized unit. I'm part of the FBI Match Task Force, and I'll explain what that is in a second. But we work these cases, and I've got resources in Atlanta that help with this stuff. And so you can call me. My phone number will be at the end of the presentation. HSI does stuff with human trafficking and child victims, GBI as well, and then the Special Victims Unit of your police department. We've got something that's called the Innocence Lost National Initiative, and it's a proactive approach that the FBI is part of, and the Department of Justice and NCMEC to target this type of these types of crimes. It was implemented in 2003, so it's been around for 11 years. And I said it's a joint initiative with DOJ and NCMEC and the FBI. And we target organizations involved in child prostitution, trying to target them as an enterprise instead of just an isolated incident. Here are all of the task forces across the country. The one in Atlanta is the one that I'm part of. And so there's, I think, 69 total, or 66. The MATCH stands for Metro Atlanta Trafficking of Children Task Force. It's operated by the FBI. Members with Atlanta PD, Cobb County PD, Fulton County, GBI, Gwinnett, Marietta, Sandy Springs, mostly around Atlanta. There are myself, agents in Augusta, agents in Athens, and Savannah are all part of the task force at this point. The goal of the Innocence Lost National Initiative is to develop the task forces. We have over 600 task force officers and over 300 law enforcement agencies involved. So the wider scope, the more we can reach. They provide equipment for us. They do trainings. It's, as I said, to do criminal enterprise cases instead of isolated incidents, and then case coordination and track national trends to try to provide intelligence to everybody. We have a very victim-centered approach. That's where Nancy comes in. We've got the Office for Victim Assistance, which does more than just child sex trafficking, but they work with them. We have 119 victim specialists, 6 full-time forensic interviewers, and then child exploitation resource teams.
And so just as you hear Kim talk about the task force that they have that works across the state, and they collaborate very well with local, federal, and state law enforcement, from the victim services approach, we also take a team approach. When we're gearing up for, proactive investigation in Macon or Augusta or Savannah, I get my community partners on board ahead of time to let them know, hey, we have something coming up. We may need your assistance. That includes DFACs, the Child Advocacy Center, the local Rape Crisis Center, any agency in that community that I know can positively impact my victim or who has resources to assist my victim. So it's not just, the FBI victim specialist going out and saving the world. It doesn't happen that way. We need everyone in this room to take part in that process.
You can see over 2,000 cases, over 3,100 children have been recovered, and that was as of February of 2014. We've had over 1,400 convictions, 11 life sentences, and we've seized $3.1 million. The youngest victim was 9, so that just kind of puts it into perspective. Something that they've done that's proactive is called Operation Cross Country. They've done 7 of them. This was the locations of the last time they did it, and it's a nationwide, all in the same weekend. I think it's over the weekend now. It started out as just a day, but now it's a weekend. Undercover operations throughout the country. And then the stats, they did 79 cities, 450 state, local, federal partners, over 12,000 law enforcement participants, 581 pimps were arrested, and 434 children were recovered across the country, which is huge. This was the biggest by far that they've done. They also do something called special event assistance, which I think is really interesting. Any high-profile sporting event or large function is typically going to draw people that are going to be interested in prostitution and juvenile prostitution. The Final Four that was in Atlanta last year, Super Bowl, whatever that was, 38, I think. Last year, 38, am I right? 38, whatever, the one in New Jersey. There's something called Hot August Nights. It's a big hot rod event out in Reno, and then all-star games for baseball or football or whatever. The one that I think is just fantastic was the Super Bowl this year. They recovered 16 children. 16. That is the highest. They doubled the best that they'd ever done before. So that included, they did 6 months of training for local and state law enforcement, and they had so many partners that were out there that night or that weekend targeting this that they were able to recover 16 juveniles. So I think that's a huge success. And another one that I'd like to tell you guys about is the cases here in Macon. If you read the Telegraph, you've probably heard of it, but I'm going to tell you a little bit from our perspective. This is Arthur Reed. This is all on Facebook. He's got it open to the public. You can see him holding his money, counting his money. This was his status for that picture. Yo, it's First Friday, ain't got no job. I do have any kids, I think is what he's trying to say, or don't not have any kids. I want to go out, but I don't have a car. One thing I do have is a pocket full of money. I crack myself up sometimes, haha. Royal family stand up. Royal family is his stable, his group of girls. He calls himself Royal Boy, that's his rapper name. And so he calls the girls his royal family. And he says, I don't have a job, but I have a pocket full of cash. Really? It's from prostitution. And this is his tattoo, Royal Boy. That's one of his girls. She got tattooed with Royal Girl. The status for that picture said, yo, I got 2 girls to get my name tattooed on them in less than 6 months. Ha ha. He's proud of it. He's proud of what he gets the girls to do. He was indicted by a federal grand jury in 2013. We charged him with 4 counts of sex trafficking of children, 3 counts of child pornography, because he had pictures of the juveniles on his phone naked in a bathtub. So that is production of child pornography. He pled guilty on December 23rd of last year to 1 count of sex trafficking. And I know when I first started, I was like, wait a second, we charged him with 7 counts and he pled to 1. The way that typically these sentences are run, they would have been run concurrent, all at the same time. So to get him to plea, that's typically what they do because it would have been the same sentence whether he pled to 1 or he pled to 4. His sentencing is set for next week. It's at 10 o'clock in the morning at the federal courthouse. If you guys want to attend, it is an open sentencing, and it'll be interesting if you want to see victim's perspective. So that's at 10 o'clock. His anticipated guidelines are anywhere between 20 to 30 years. 20 to 30 years. The activity went on for about 2 years, from September 2011 to February of 2013. He is 27 years old. So when he turns 30, he will be 57. He will be spending the majority of his life in jail. There is no parole in the federal system. Since this is a federal case, he's not going to get out in 5. He will be in the entire time he is sentenced for, which is huge. And he will have to register as a sex offender when he gets out of jail. So he will not be able to live near schools. He won't be able to interact with children, which is good. We'll keep him from exploiting anyone else. We had 3 juvenile victims. They ranged in age from 14 to 16 at the time of their exploitation. They all had a history of runaway. So just like we talked about, this is what we saw. He prostituted victims on Backpage.com at Macon area hotels, specifically the Days Inn, the Economy Inn, and the Motel 6, down Eisenhower 475 area. He took all the money the girls made. He used physical violence against the girls. He carried a BB gun that they all thought was real. And this was a joint investigation by the FBI, the GBI, and the Bibb County Sheriff's Office. A huge success story for us. Do you guys have any comments, questions, suggestions? Yes. We do.
We do.
We do. Mm-hmm. Yep. It doesn't get as much publicity because it's a smaller scale, but yes, we do.
And you see them moving from area to area as the big
Yes.
Yes.
Yep. St. Patrick's Day is huge down in Savannah, and yes, the Masters. Yep. All of that stuff is definitely targeted. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So, first of all, I should say that recovery for these girls is a very long road. This didn't happen in a vacuum. There were issues that they had in their life prior to them getting into this lifestyle that were not necessarily effectively addressed. And so it's almost like, and Kim is right by my side, it's almost like you're raising these children again, and you're having to connect them with the appropriate resources. Georgia Cares is a program here in Georgia. It's the single point of entry to services into CSEC, for CSEC victims. And one of the things that we do when we recover a juvenile after we call DFACS is make a call to Georgia Cares. Georgia Cares has not only counseling resources that they can arrange around the state, but they also have shelter resources. They're incredibly limited. Sometimes it takes weeks or months to get girls into a CSEC-specific placement. But during that time, we're supporting them as best we can. So unfortunately, sometimes the girls do have charges and they wind up in DJJ custody. Other times they wind up in DFACS custody. What we're seeing, of course, is just through working these cases and getting more active working the cases is, most times putting those children back in that home is not the best option. So we have to get really creative and we have to really stay on top of it. And we also have to have buy-in from the girls. If they don't see their future the same way that we see their future, it's never going to be effective. So we really work very closely. Our phones ring at all hours of the night, because girls are in distress or they feel stranded or they're worried or they don't know where they're going to be next week. And they are probably the most, victim-intensive cases that we work. So if you have more than one CSEC investigation going on at a time, you're swamped, you're buried, because the girls really require a lot of attention. They require transportation. Many of them don't have identification. You're really starting from square one, and you have to look at it holistically. So Georgia Cares is a great partner for us in that.
On that, Beth, will you stand up real quick? Put her on the spot. I do want you guys to know about something. If you saw the flyers, Hope Haven is going to be opening soon for CSEC-specific victims. It's a branch of Hepzibah's Children's Home, and this is the first we'll have in the area. Right now, most of our girls go to Georgia Baptist program. It's up in Palmetto, and that means Nancy has to drive from Savannah all the way to Palmetto, and I have to drive from Macon. So having placement here for the girls will be huge, and it'll be really nice to have that resource. And Beth is the executive director, so if you guys are interested in getting involved with that, you can talk to her. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I'm from Southeast Georgia, and I know there was a circular, and then there was half of beyond Savannah. What FBI resources are for Lake Boston?
Right. So our Savannah office covers, we have a Brunswick office, which is a small RA. So there's 3 agents in Brunswick. And from a victim services perspective, I also cover Southeast Georgia. So I cover from, the border up to Augusta, Athens, Macon, and Savannah. So one of the things that I am constantly shouting about, and anyone that's dealt with me here knows, our victim services are very Atlanta-centric, and our victims are not. So it takes time. And we do have girls who are being placed from Southeast Georgia up into, the Palmetto area. Hopefully Macon is going to ease some of that. But yeah, absolutely. If you have questions or you have concerns about any victims or any investigations in that area, reach out to our Savannah or Brunswick office.
Other questions? Yeah. We have that happening right now, actually. There are other resources for girls that are pregnant. It's their decision, obviously, to keep the baby or not, and we just work with them to provide, whether it's a maternity program or just the resources they need. If they're at home, getting them to doctor's appointments, making sure they're getting their medicine. There are a lot of programs that'll provide that for free for girls who need it, and so that's a Nancy thing.
So we've identified 2 major gaps in service throughout the state in the past, 6 months to a year. One is girls who are pregnant. The second is, and I just lost my train of thought, girls who are actively recruiting or engaging in recruiting behavior when they're in a placement. So whether it's DJJ or foster care or whether they've gone back home, if they are actively still trying to recruit other girls, even though they've been victims, there is not a lot of services available for them yet. So it is something that statewide we're trying to address, and Georgia Cares is aware of those 2 major gaps. And I'm sure there's more gaps that we just haven't found yet. But again, it's a matter of becoming very creative and just putting the pieces together that are going to work the best for that victim. There's no ideal situation. When we have places like Hope Haven coming on board and hopefully more throughout the state, that's a godsend for us because we know that they're going to look at all of those issues and address them for our victims.
I think we can do one more question, and no, we'll be around, so if you guys have more, you can come to us. But another question? Yeah? Oh, no, that's her hair. Sorry. Anyone else? Yeah. Yeah, the pimps. Yeah, I don't know the last time they've had one, but there was a big convention, and Ice-T, who you guys might know as one of the officers on the Special Victims Unit, which works these crimes. He's actually a big part of that. It's the Pimp's Ball or something like that. And it's a big event, and it's horrific. I see some faces like, are you serious? When I heard that he was involved and he plays a cop that helps kids, like, it's just messed up. But it's a pimping convention where they talk about pimping and they talk trade and things like that. They dress up like you would think a pimp looks like, with the chains, the hats, the cane. And it's a real thing, and because it's free speech, there is nothing we can do about it. I do know that a lot of times there will be officers in there in undercover type capacities trying to gain intelligence and to look for girls who might be juveniles, because the men will bring their girls with them. They're probably not going to bring the juveniles. They're going to leave them back at the hotel, but they're going to show off their best girls. I mean, that's what they do. So that is another big problem, is finding a way to shut that down. But last I heard, it was still going, but it's been a year or so since I heard about it, so I'm not sure. But that does happen, and fortunately, Macon doesn't have anything like that we're aware of, but it is an issue. Thank you guys so much for your time. If you have any questions, that's my cell phone and Nancy's number. If you encounter a victim, if you have questions, anything like that, please feel free to call me. If I don't answer, leave a message. I will call you back. And I appreciate your time and attentiveness and your cooperation.